Très bien, bonjour, je vous propose de...
Well, good afternoon. So we'll have oui, donc
session called the Financing the Ecological and Societal Transition, the Keys to a Green, Competitive and Fair Europe. Lille Place Financière, Association of Banking, Insurance and more broadly the key players of the finance in Hauts-de-France, is happy to partner with the World Forum and the Réseau Alliance and for this session. It's obvious that climate change and environmental deterioration are, for all of us, one of the most critical challenges. To respond to this pressing challenge, the European Union has embarked on a major economic transformation to create a modern economy, efficient in the use of resources, and competitive with critical objectives. Achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, promoting economic growth independence of the use of resources, and guaranteeing social inclusion. At the heart of this transformation are the financing mechanisms put in place by the European Union. What are the priorities at European level? In particular, strategic investments in green technologies, infrastructure, sustainable environment innovation. How those European institutions support the transition? What is the role of the private sector? How those both cooperate? To address those topics, I'm happy to welcome Madlen. Madlen SOBKOWIAK, you are Associate Professor in Accounting at EDHEC Business School, one of the famous business schools we have in Northern France, with a focus on sustainability, accounting and reporting, and the broader impact of business on society and the environment. You are involved in pivotal science-business collaborations, like the Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, which aligns major seafood companies towards enhancing the sustainability of marine practices. In addition to your research and teaching, you are also a council member of the Center for Social Environmental Accounting Research. So welcome. Yann NOTERDAEME, you founded CSR Europe, a network of 100 corporate members and national partner organizations that supports and unites 10,000 enterprises across Europe on corporate sustainability and responsibility. You took an active role in the preparation and negotiations of the EU Directive on Non-Financial Information of Enterprises, source of today's CSRD, ESRD, and CSDDD. You support CSR Europe in building a policy narrative towards a European Social Green Deal 2024-2029. You co-founded with Professor Emeritus Philippe de Vaught and Professor Valérie Swan the Louvain CSR network aimed at mainstreaming CSR across the full curriculum of the Louvain School of Management. Thank you for being with us today. And we are waiting Vianney Merchez, which you join in a minute, which work for NeoEco, a firm located in northern France, developing the circular economy to minimize the impact on the planet without sacrificing our comfort and pleasure in France, but also abroad. So we will go through those topics with our guests for like 45 to 60 minutes, leaving time for questions and answers. So be prepared to raise questions. This session will be recorded, and you will find it on the World Forum website. So let's start with you, Yann. And firstly, can you present the activity of CSR Europe?
Yes, Grégory, thank you. And very happy to be here. Just entering with one foot into the building, I already get very, very positive vibes and energy. So thank you for that, because we all need it. Before I answer the question about what is CSR Europe, I wanted to share what we experience today. I think we all have a duty, a moral duty, a political duty to unite, to learn from each other. It can happen in days like the World Forum Lille. it can happen also through more structured organizations. For instance, Réseau Alliance here in the north of France. It can also be at higher level, at European level, in organizations like CSI Europe, or at global level. Some of you might know the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. But there is a duty for companies to unite, to collaborate, to learn from each other, from bad practice, from good practice, in more structured organizations, for instance, like CSI Europe. So what is it that we do? First, we are the kind of umbrella organization linking the different national, regional networks on corporate sustainability and responsibility. Réseau Alliance is one of the 40 national partners that we unite. And there is a waste in Europe, not only of food and other goods, but we waste intelligence. Europe is, in fact, very, very rich. There is a wealth of ideas, of innovations, of ways to transform business, and we do not use enough from south to north and east and west all this critical mass of new practice, new changes. So CSI Europe is a kind of permanent laboratory where this intelligence can be shared across all Europe and between Europe and the other continents. We focus, we do three things. One, we accompany companies in their sustainability transformation. And I will not deploy what that all means. It starts with resetting a purpose. And then you look at governance and strategy and management systems and processes, and you continue all along the value chain. So we accompany companies in that transformation. We also organize, facilitate, coordinate collaborative platforms. We will not reach any impact if we do not collaborate. A single company cannot address alone the size of the problems and the complexity of the problems. So we have to work together, and we are an organization that is incubating and organizing such collaborative alliances or platforms. And maybe there will be some examples later. And then last but not least, we need system change. We need a cultural change. And that is why CSI Europe is an organization that is using all this intelligence that we collect and that we share and that we learn from. We translate that into our dialogue and our engagement and collaboration with the EU policymakers. We don't make any statements on dots and commas. We do a bottom-up use of practice of companies. We explain to the policymakers not what they should do, we explain what companies can do and how sustainability becomes a business case when companies do it well, not for greenwashing, but for taking better decisions, to better invest or to better disinvest. So these are three activities we do now. The focus is on three levels. One, we focus a lot on managing value chains and supply chains, embedding human rights, environment, and climate across all your value chain is extremely complex. So that's one. And we have a strong focus also on the raw materials. The second is, as I mentioned already, and that is what brings us together also today, better governance and transparency. Not transparency for transparency. Transparency as a means to increase your performance and also your interaction with the investors. And then the horizontal topic that we are dealing with is what we call just transition. How do we make sure that we do not create more inequalities? And this transition, this energy transition, this demographic transition, the digital transition, is creating inequalities. And there is a perception, and I will maybe finish here, there is a perception, more than a perception. There was a survey by La Banque BNP Paribas and Ipsos in France. They interviewed 10,000 citizens across Europe. 7 out of 10 strongly believe that the climate transition is going to increase the inequalities between the well to do, and the poorest groups, the vulnerable groups, also in Europe and of course also outside Europe. So that's a bit in a nutshell what we do. One topic, if I may, is how do we engage the companies? First, ateliers. You get in an atelier, no speeches, no platforms. En français, on dit on se retrousse les manches. And among peers, you revisit some of your deep strategic processes. Is it HR? Is it supply chain? Is it whatever departments? Sustainability is across all the departments. It's not the monopoly of a CSO and his team. It goes across all departments, including tax departments in companies. So Ateliers is there to do a one-year trajectory where, with peers, you revisit the DNA of some of your processes and you inject your sustainability in your processes. So no gadgets from on top. It happens based on existing procedures. We have what we call EU masterclasses, is to help companies to embed this new generation, and Madlen will speak about it, this new generation of sustainability regulations of Europe. There is a before and an after 2024. And if you don't do that proactively, then it becomes a tsunami, une avalanche. And then you find tricks, you give it to the legal affairs who will protect you, and you buy time of a consultant who is going to make you a clean sheet, a clean report. So it will not transform anything. The companies we work with, they do it proactively, together with us, so that the regulations become an enabler to accelerate your own targets and strategy on sustainability as a company. We also organize the collaborative platforms. I mentioned that already. I have some examples, but I have spoken already too much. Grégory.
Thank you, and thank you for this plaidoyer for Europe, I would say. So when it comes to sustainability in the European Union, we used to talk about the Green Deal. What is the Green Deal? What is this Green Deal aiming at, and what are the key priorities for European Union and key initiatives in respect of this Green Deal?
So the Green Deal is the kind of flagship. It's a flag with a big slogan, and the Green Deal is the name for what is the ever first European integrated strategy for a sustainable Europe 2030-2050. So it's the name of this integrated sustainability strategy. It has been very much inspired also by leaders of civil society, including from business, from industry, but also the youth movement of Europe, the green NGOs, the social NGOs, academia. 30 leaders have been working for 2.5 years to make policy choices, proposals for the EU to define and to develop such a strategy. Also 380 CEOs 5 years ago together asked for a new deal. And all these ideas have been taken on board in the Green Deal. Now the Green Deal is one big target. It's saying where is the beach that we need to reach. It's 2050, and it is therefore helping Europe to become the first climate neutral continent in the world. So very, very big ambition. Now, if I have to explain it to myself, I have this one number, which is today, the way I live, I move, I eat, I heat my house, I rent or I build a house. Everything I do in my daily lives is consuming 10 tons of CO2. And what is true for me is true for you. It's an average number. And the Green Deal is asking us to reduce from 10 ton today to 2 ton. So whatever we do, even drinking that water from that bottle, I need to put myself the question, how can I do that tomorrow with 5 times less CO2 emissions? That is the ambition. So this is asking a mind shift, a revolution in culture, on how we live. And we all want to continue to live with, I would say, a certain level of happiness. So how do we define happiness and well-being in 2050, knowing that we have to do radical changes in the way we live? Now, the Green Deal has, in its overall strategy, different policies. The mother of all the policies is called the climate law. And this is a system whereby the EU, especially the European Commission, is screening all the time to see if all the other policies, regulations, and strategies contribute to another target, which is in 2030, that's in 6 years, how do we cut by 55% the total of our greenhouse gas emissions? So 2050, it's the beach, climate neutral. In between, 2030, it's a one-stop already with 55% cut. So that is it's called the climate law, that is looking at all the other policies. Do you contribute or do you increase? Now, you have a clean energy policy in the Green Deal. That's to increase, for instance, it's just a few examples because it's massive, this strategy, but an example is how do we increase the EU offshore wind capacity from 12 to 300 gigawatts by 2050, or to produce not 1 million tons of hydrogen in 24, but how do we increase and reach 10 million tons of hydrogen? It includes also a circular economic action plan to increase the durability, the reusability, the recycling, the reparability, and reusability of products. It's a major policy that includes all kinds of regulations. Another element is the building and renovation policy. 40% of EU energy consumption is taken by building and renovation. So it's a radical approach to renew the way we build and renovate. Then you have the sustainable mobility policy. There, the target is to cut the transport emissions by 90% in 2050. So one mid-term target is 2035, which is every new car cannot be built with an engine that is depending on CO2, on fossils. And we know, and we start feeling some automotive say, oh la 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 la, we will not reach that, we need to revisit that. There is also a farm to fork strategy, because food systems are responsible for more or less 30% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So the way we produce, we cultivate, we process food, we transport food, it's an all-inclusive from farm to fork strategy. Then there's also an EU biodiversity strategy. I will not get into that. There's also the so-called research and innovation strategy called Horizon, which is also about investing in research. Is it in batteries, in biodiversity, in hydrogen, in low-carbon steel, etc., etc. So you have this all-inclusive strategy, and there are two elements I need to add. One is, how do you pay all that? So there is one European sustainable finance strategy. And one of the pillars of that strategy is what is called the climate, environmental, and social taxonomy, which is a regulation on investors. Every investor who wants to put a new financial product into the market, a social bond, a green bond, whatever you call it, will need to follow a taxonomy, will need to screen the companies they want to invest in. Do the economic activities of that company correspond to the definition written in the taxonomy? It's very complex. The social taxonomy has been a victim because the climate taxonomy has been an usine à gaz. I don't know how to say that in English. But this is one way for Europe to unlock financial capitals to flow to companies to support them in this short, medium, and very long transition they are in. Voilà. The second element is called the just transition strategy, because we all feel that not everybody can advance in this shift, in this transition at the same pace. So where is there a transition that is more fair, more inclusive? So that's another strategy. But again, I said too much, Grégory.
That's really fine. We definitely have a major transition in front of us. When it comes to finance this transition, what are the mechanism, what are the tools which are promoted by the European Union to finance this transition?
Yes. How do we fund and finance all of that? So, since this commission, which started in 2019, the von der Leyen Commission, they developed a Green Deal investment plan. And that includes 2 financing streams. In total, the Green Deal investment plan is 1 trillion of euros. So what are the 2 financing streams in that investment plan? One captures the half of 1 trillion comes from what is called the EU budget. Every year, member states pay a part to the EU that becomes the EU budget. But it's the budget of the EU together with the EU emissions trading system. That counts for half of that 1 trillion to support the Green Deal efforts. The other half is coming from what is called the EU Invest initiative. That includes 280 billion from public and private sectors and 115 billion from national co-financing. So you have all this kind of mechanism. Inside this 1 trillion, there is a 100 billion that is spent to what I mentioned, the just transition mechanism. And that goes mainly to the sectors and the regions where you still have a lot of coal mines that needs to be closed by 2030. I don't know if you imagine what it means. Well, you can imagine because of the north of France, what it takes to radically change a region that was based mainly on a coal economy that you need to transform into a renewable energy region or in a diversified economic region. This just transition mechanism is a financial tool, but it goes together with a European roadmap, a plan for governments to push far more on the just dimension of the transition. And it happened that this roadmap of governments was developed a year and a half ago, and at the same time, companies at CISA Europe developed the European Business Roadmap on Just Transition. And what is interesting in the collaboration between business and the EU policymakers is that it will be explained, I think, you will, as from next year, see companies, they will need to comply with a new directive on transparency and using sustainability reporting standards. And there are 12 standards, 4 of the 12 are social. And they focus on what do you do as companies to support your workforce, especially the upskilling and reskilling. What do you do for your suppliers, for sustainable supply chains? What do you do for your customers to not leave them alone and make sure that they can afford sustainability products? And what do you do for the communities you operate in? These 4 standards are exactly the same topics that you find in the business roadmap for just transition. So companies will see in 2 mirrors, what is EU asking to me? And they can see in the business roadmap, where can I find innovation, tools to have more impact, to perform better? Well, so that is also one point to say how we can. But on the fund, I would just say there's one other budget stream that I find extremely important. It's called in the jargon of Brussels, the CBCR, country by country reporting on tax. And at CISA Europe, we are developing a European tax index on responsible tax behavior of companies. because we cannot accept companies flagging how good they are on the SDGs, on the ESG, on whatever name you call it. And at the same time, they are the Olympic champions on tax evasion. And we all saw in COVID that some of the basics, health, were not secured by enough investment. And we see it in the canteens of the schools for better food for the kids. We see it in the mobility, we see it, les EHPAD, we say in French? Les EHPAD, taking care of all the generations. All these basics are depending on responsible tax behavior. Not only, but a lot. So that's another financial stream that we think is extremely important.
So thank you, Jan. Paying tax is also CSR. That's what I understand. So priorities are clear and the mechanisms are in place. I switch to you, Madlen. And first, talking about your institution. Hello, Vianney. Welcome on board. Yeah, right. A few words about EDHEC and how those EDHEC and sustainability do resonate.
Of course. Thank you for being here as well, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm very new to Lille, so it's exciting to see that vibrant community of people who care about sustainability issue and think about how we can transition and move forward. At EDHEC, I think there are three things, in particular when you think EDHEC is a business school, it's a higher education place, so obviously education is a big element of that. And educating future managers, leaders, entrepreneurs, whatever job they might do, in understanding the challenges, understanding the world that they will go into when they graduate, and thinking creatively about solutions to it, being passionate about their own priorities and what they want to support later on when they go into work, in order to be able to deal with these challenges in whatever corporation or whatever kind of company they might end up with, but being able to understand them, to push forward, to come up with new ways of dealing with it. The other hand, of course, is the research side. So we do a lot of research into a lot of these challenges. We have the Climate Risk Institute, for example, at EDHEC, does a lot about risk modeling, climate risk into finance. I'm an accountant myself, so I do a lot of research around disclosures, accountability, businesses, and transparency, but that research alongside goes in the strategy department, in pretty much all departments. The last thing is science-business collaboration. Working together with businesses at co-creating solutions that might not exist at the moment. Jan very much earlier said we need collaborations. And we see this across a range of different challenges. That we, as scientists, we have a certain set of knowledge. The corporations do also have a certain set of knowledge around their own operations, the challenges that they are facing. And coming together and creating that space to co-create is very much important. As it was introduced earlier, I work a lot with the 9 biggest seafood companies, for example, on an initiative together. It's a big science team. And the aim is really not us coming in and telling the companies, you have to do ABC, because that doesn't exist yet. But to think about supply chain management, human rights, plastic, antibiotics, biodiversity, endangered species, all of these challenges that are currently faced by the ocean, and how we can think about attacking these problems together in bigger collaborations, and hopefully in the speed that they are needed, and in the scope that they are needed. So I think these are the 3 main areas.
Okay, so sustainability matters to you, and sustainability matters to EDHEC. EU intends to influence business practices and direct financial resources to a sustainable economy. Could you give us some colors about the regulatory framework the Commission is currently implementing?
Yep, I think Jan already started off talking a lot about the Green Deal. The Green Deal is kind of the big starting point in aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050, and that kind of started off. As part of this, there's a range of different regulations that applies to companies operating within the European Union. One of these is, for example, certain elements around disclosures. Some of them are more around the taxonomy. Why? On the one hand, the aim very much is to redirect finances towards sustainable activities, but that requires transparency, accountability. It needs to tackle ideas around greenwashing. And one idea was, yes, and Jan mentioned that we have budgets for kind of public finances, but it became very clear that this transition is only possible if we also engage the private sector. It only works if we are working alongside different types of companies, and private sector is a very important player. The problem with the private sector in the past, greenwashing is probably a term that people have heard before. So there was an idea of, beforehand, there wasn't even clear what a sustainable business activity even is. What does it mean to be green? What does it mean to be sustainable? And the EU taxonomy very much aims to be very clear in defining what would count as a sustainable business activity. It's a document, I think it's 550 pages long, so it's very detailed, very much. But the main aim is you have to contribute to at least 1 out of the 6 environmental targets in the EU. It started with carbon. It has also a target on biodiversity, circular economy, I think water pollution. And you can't have a negative impact on any of the other 5. So you have to contribute to 1 positively. You can't have a negative impact on the others. That's good in setting kind of the framework of when can you call something sustainable or green. Underneath that, there's also disclosure frameworks. One, and I hate bringing in that many acronyms, but CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, is the newest one. Beforehand, we had the NF, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. Very much has compulsory disclosures that organizations have to do when it comes to their social and environmental impacts. And beforehand, the NFRD covered around 11,000 corporations. Now the newer one, the CSRD, extends that scope and is now covering 50,000 organizations and corporations in the EU. So it's a massive scope. And all of these companies covered either by size or by listing or by turnover or asset amount will have to report using the same set of accounting standards when it comes to 2 things. And that's also the new thing. It's called double materiality. You need to report on risks. And financial risk was something that I think corporations found fairly easy in the past to pick up and think about what are the things that are financially material to me as an organization. But now you can't just report on risk, you also have to report on impact. So it's an inside-out organization impact on the environment, and also an outside-in financial risks that occur from climate change or other environmental challenges. And I think that landscape is picking up very quickly, and we're seeing it expanding quite a lot, but these are the main regulations for organizations.
And this implementation is in progress, but what has been the reaction of the, I would say, financial and non-financial parties to this framework? As usual with regulation, I think the reaction has been mixed. So I think often there is an agreement along financial and non-financial players that you need a definition or you need a common understanding of what sustainability is. And you can't just stick ESG, environmental social governance, on everything, or SRI, or whatever label you want to use, and you're now carbon neutral or even nature positive. There's so many labels that don't really mean much. So I think there was that understanding that having a taxonomy and having a common understanding and having also some baseline reporting requirements to level the playing field and create benchmarks is important. But obviously, when you talk about regulation, often the devil is in the detail. And that's where most of the disagreement came, was the detail of what particular business activities should be included. And there were some changes. Now nuclear activities are included in the EU taxonomy. That didn't happen before, so there was some pushback from there. What we see with financial institutions, I think particularly the ones that already had a sustainability team, they were very quick in kind of rearranging their portfolio to fit within the existing the reporting frameworks. Particularly companies also that weren't covered by NFRD before seem to struggle a little bit more now. I think if you already reported on NFRD, the switch to CSRD isn't that big. If you haven't
published anything before, then we see a little bit more, I wouldn't call it being scared, but I think being intimidated by the size of the task. Because it's a big one, and some corporations might need to build up some expertise, and that's why that rollout is also phased. So 2024, it's only companies that have already been covered by NFRD, and then over the next few years, that scope increases so that companies do have enough time to build up the data management processes, the reporting processes, to kind of deal with that task.
Okay. What is your experience in this respect?
Yes. Well, first I see this new generation, and that is the Jan in me that is speaking with optimism. I call it a new generation because I hear more and more the avalanche, the tsunami, and it will kill companies. Now, a few years ago, I was happy to be in a small team with Commissioner Barnier, which the French people know well, and it was a meeting where we explained how disclosure can be a strong instrument for companies to embed sustainability if you do it in the right way. So we had all kinds of examples of how companies were able to link so-called intangible sustainability CSR activities with financial materiality. So we were able to make all the connections. And we said it's high time for you to go for a regulation, to make smart, intelligent disclosure the new norm, the new normal. Because we had plenty of evidence through experience of companies to see disclosure as a very useful tool inside. Not the tool, but one of the tools. Now, I think that with this new regulation, 5 or 8 years later, the CSRD, and the standards, that's how Europe is saying, that's the companies we want as Europeans. That is the company we as Europeans want to see developing. So it's also very much an aspirational law. But I add, there is also huge hypocrisy. Here is Europe coming again with values and regulations. But when it comes to ask the policymaker, and where do you support, where do you invest, where do you incentivize all these efforts of companies, and especially of small, medium enterprises? Because Madlen, you said that the scope is 50,000 enterprises. It's hundreds of thousands of companies that will be impacted through the B2B, through the supply chain. To get the quality of information required by the EU, you need to ask customers, you need to ask suppliers to give you the right data. And then we don't see Europe. We don't see members of the parliament. We don't see people in the commission. They are not aware of the complexity it requires inside companies. So on the one hand, Europe is creating a huge playing field, even beyond Europe. And next week I will be with large numbers of enterprises in China asking what is this European CSRD and what does it mean for us Chinese companies trading with Europe? Because there is one element also that we have to add. There is also this ban on forced labor. That is also a mega regulation where Europe is showing its teeth to other continents. But there is huge hypocrisy because we don't see the European Commission building what I call a Marshall Plan to support companies in this vast, huge, complex transformation. Through the transparency, through the devoir de vigilance, the due diligence regulation, through the deforestation law. Europe does not want you and me to eat food from deforestation. This is asking a huge revolution in the way business and trading is being done nowadays. So we are for smart regulation, and in the past, there was a 180 degrees difference between CISA Europe narrative on transparency based on evidence, completely different from the narrative of Business Europe, which is the European MEDEF, who came with all kinds of arguments and ideology. We came with facts. So there was a distance in the business community about this, but I think this now has been more or less solved. They are quieter, if I can say so, or maybe they lost the game. They started too late, or they resisted for too long. But there is that element of Europe is setting the playing field. Thank you very much. We can be proud. But you cannot be hypocrite, only waving values and norms. You need to put dust on your shoes and be close to the business, to the men and women in business that have to do the transition. And that we don't have yet.
So time to walk the talk, I would say, in this respect. Madlen, come back to you. Could you elaborate on what could be the green financial instruments that would be available for companies and any parties to finance this transition?
Absolutely. I mean, there are nowadays a range of different financial instruments out there that can be used. I think traditionally people have, and I think John mentioned a few of them, things like green funds, where one of the traditional old school funding opportunities that different kind of investment vehicles that could be attached. And they were often attached to this kind of ESG criteria. As I said, that was sometimes very loose, so things could be classified as ESG. One listing company did it that way, a different listing one did it differently. But this is still available. There are also now certain exchanges that only list, like I think about the Luxembourg Green Exchange, only listing companies, or if they kind of adhere to a certain minimum social and environmental standards. So that is a traditional generally, and there are different ways of thinking about it. That covers companies that are already seen as being sustainable either, or companies that are best of class, showing within their own industry they are doing a good job at transitioning. But that only covered sometimes a certain amount of companies, and the problem is sometimes you weren't really attracting companies that weren't sustainable yet, but actually would need the financial support to become sustainable. So it kind of excluded, either it was very relaxed, the standard, and everyone kind of fitted into some ESG criteria, or it was very strict and people were out. The other one traditionally was green bonds. So particularly when you think about having a huge investment, offshore wind parks is a great example, or a new building. Then you could issue a bond and raise money, particularly for that project. That only applies, or still applies, to projects that are sustainable, and you can only justify spending or expenses that are sustainable to the project. So it works, again, if you have one big project. Then issuing green bonds works quite well to get funding for that. You can't use the money for anything else, which means it's often very difficult in practice when you work with businesses to kind of fund a general transition through that process, because a lot of these processes that we talk about, you can't match the expense daily to that particular project. And that's why over the last few years, there's a new category of loans coming out, sustainability-linked loans, or sustainability-linked bonds. And they were quite different than the previous things, because there the idea is that your loan provider sits down with you as a company, and you agree on a set of indicators and targets. If you're managing to improve your sustainability performance across these indicators, you get a reduction in coupon rate. So you pay less for the loan if after 2 or 5 years you're able to prove that you have met these particular criteria that you have predefined beforehand. These are individually negotiated, so the idea very much is you're starting with where is the company at the moment, what would be realistic targets for the company achieve over a predefined time frame. If they don't meet it, they have to pay higher coupon rate. If they do meet it, they kind of get a financial incentive through lower coupon rates. benefits, as I said, is it enables a company more flexibly to adjust where they feel they need the funding for, what transition processes they want, how they want to spend it. Obviously, there are some challenges around setting these kind of stretch goals. They need to be difficult but achievable in that sense, and there are some challenges around that. But this traditionally are kind of the three main ways. It's either being listed through a mutual fund or in other vehicles on a green fund, issuing green bonds, particularly for larger projects, or now we've seen it with companies that we work with over the last few years, this increase in sustainability-linked loans or other funding that requires you as a corporation to prove you have become more sustainable, and then you get a financial incentive in your financing.
So thank you, Madlen. So it means that sustainability pays off also financial-wise. Let's turn to you, Vianney. Welcome again.
Thank you very much.
So I did introduce you to the audience, but tell us more about your company, NeoEco.
Yes, NeoEco is a company which is specialized in circular economy. So we rebuilt some building with old material, and we do other things like Village des Jeux Olympiques. So when the city of Paris became to build everything for Jeux Olympiques, NeoEco was here to advise and to rebuild with some material which were on the ground. So we did that, and we work in special area like in Ukraine, in Lebanon, in south of Turkey. Right now I work on a project in Libya after the flood. You know, they need some advice. And so the mission of NeoEco is going where not a lot of companies come and propose this solution, you know. When people want to rebuild very quickly, we can say to them, you have some wellness, you have some material, you have lots of things, and you can rebuild with that. It's like hope, you know. So we already tested it in Ukraine and in Lebanon after the blast of the port, and we saw that in the south of Turkey after the earthquake. We arrive and we say to people, you know, everything is not bad. We can create something new with the old, but with a green way of mind. And it's very important for us.
And I imagine that you do not do it alone.
No.
How do you create partnerships around your project?
Yeah, it's very important for us to come in a country, but with joint venture or something like that with local people, because when we arrive, we have a knowledge, a special knowledge. But in fact, what we want is to give this knowledge to other companies, to be sure that green and capacity of company in construction can be the future, but not only with Occidental company, not only with European company, but maybe with other company for Middle East or other things. And that's why we always do a joint venture with local company when we work. Plus, we are in special area when we are in foreign countries, so we create work for people who lose it in very special conditions.
And how do you finance your project? And does the EU has a role in this respect?
This is a question. It's a real question. So we have many projects. For example, in France, it was Ministry of Economy, French Ministry of Economy, who financed our position, but it was a gift. It was not a bond, it was a real gift for the country. So France said to Lebanon government that they give us money for our project and just only for this project. But it's not create debt for NeoEco, you know. And we did the same in Ukraine and we did the same in Turkey. But after, when you give your knowledge, European Union come with lots and lots and lots of financial possibilities for local people to work. That's what's happening in Ukraine right now. For example, they don't give that to our company, but they give that to local company which have our knowledge right now, and we can advise them. So this is the situation actually. For example, we have a project for rebuild 5 schools in the south of Ukraine, and we work on it with Ukrainian people, with Ukrainian veterans. They come back to war, and some people are very, very lost in their life, and so we are here to put them work and to bring them to a new life with our project. And this is European Commission who give us finance to do that.
And can you elaborate a little bit on your Ukrainian project?
Yeah, it was a special project because we arrived 2 years ago, so the war was not so far to Kyiv. And when we arrived, a French embassy said to us that we need you in Hostomel. Hostomel is near to Bucha. It's some special area in Kyiv because in Bucha lots of people died. And so for us, we have the business part, but we have the social part too. And we mix the both. And with circular economy, it's more easier to do that because you, as I said a few minutes ago, you don't go only for business, but you bring hope for people. And so in Ukraine, that's what's happened. You know, we arrive and we say to people, we will rebuild, but with all your old material. So you naturally lose your house, you will have a new house with the old material, new life, new start, fresh start. So it's easy to say that right now in France, but in Ukraine, 13 months ago, it was a real challenge to put this in the Ukrainian mind. But I think we success in that.
Thank you very much. Time flies. Do you have any questions? A time for questions and answers. Yeah. Yeah, Mike.
Somabé, et je suis un chercheur à l'Institut catholique de Lille.
I am a researcher at the University in Lille. I have a question regarding for Vianney. From your experience in Ukraine, the funding you received, is it European Union who paid via France, via your company, or was it paid directly to Ukraine because it was in the context where they are still not part of the EU? A part of the EU was given by the French ministry, finance ministry, for Hostomel, and the second part in the south of Ukraine, Nikolaev. This is a gift that was given to the city from the European Union for our project. I was very much interested listening to you because apart from the economic value and the human value, it is the hope. This is great. Everything was destroyed. If I understand well, you take part of the destroyed material. This is exactly it. Maybe my English was not good enough. We try to reuse as much material as we can. In NOECO, we are working on recycling materials after demolitions. In social housing in Lille, we can reuse up to 80% of the building in rebuilding in another place. So in Ukraine, it's difficult when you get somewhere, it has been bombed, and everything is destroyed, and you tell, well, this is something we're going to destroy completely. So there was still a little rest. It is not going to exist anymore. We're going to... And we would say, you've been bombed. I remember a meeting we had with them. We are going to bring something new to you, but we are not going to erase your life. We're going to create something new. And it is an ecological dimension. It's all around funding, around green, but let's not forget the ecology, social ecology part, which is taken into account the human being who is in front of you and the way you bring your business, your gift, your fund, but by respecting this person. It's an ecological dimension, and this is NEOCO, my company. 70% of our company in the export is in complicated area, in crisis area. All right. This is very interesting because I worked on environmental justice, where it is important to keep the human at the heart of. This is very interesting. Thank you very much. I have another question to Jan. Jan, you talked about the hypocrisy regarding the laws coming from European institutions. This hypocrisy, I see it internationally. It is true that the actual system doesn't allow states to help their companies, but sometimes you need constraints, regardless from Europe. Like, for instance, Donald Trump. There were American companies. He just didn't resist. So we see that the economic interests are more important than the challenge and around the challenges.
I think that it's at the root
Et
of
en
the
Afrique,
questions.
pareil, on voit comment on veut.
In Africa, it's the same. If you want to fight, there is some money, and we ask for some more.
Répondre directement à la question, mais
I'm not sure I can answer this question. I would invite all of you, nevertheless, to look at the global gateway. This is a very recent strategy of the European Commission. And it is the way the Europeans want to renovate or renew the strategic agreements with Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And there are a couple of new agreements with bilateral agreements, strategic agreements. It's massive investment from Europe with some blending, finance, private and public, on specific topics, and it brings some added value for the partner country. There is some hope. I remember Louis Michel, who said 40 years of development policy at the European Union did not develop anybody. Today, Europe is fragile. It has very little autonomy, especially regarding rare materials and raw materials. And what we're expecting from third countries, especially the ones who have those rare substances for the electrification of our automotive fleet, especially, they say more and more, we don't want any more. And they say it's easier for them to tell the European. It's harder to tell it the Chinese partners in Republic of Congo or Zambia. Do not come and extract our minerals as you did in the past. We send it to China. It's been transformed, and then it arrives in in Europe for batteries. The partners, especially in Congo, they tell us, come, but the management of the mines need to be responsible. You need to take care of the artisanal miners. Like in the last centuries, the gold seekers looking for mines. You have the big concessionaires, and then you have the small artisanal miners with a lot of risks. They requested to be very responsible. And second, these need to remain, these materials need to remain in the province, in the country where they have been extracted, in order to create trades and transformation of these minerals before they reach their last and final sewage. So it's value creation. Let's set up strategic partnerships around value creation. Europe gets the minerals, the refined minerals, and there is some local added value in terms of work, education, and diversification of the local economic tissue, not only the mines. This otherwise provokes a non-governance and a lack of too much criminality. But Europe is very slow. The Chinese and the Americans were quicker. These partner countries find it hard to resist, but we try to bring in a win-win proposal via this global gateway. One road, one belt strategy in China. For this win-win strategy, in the South countries, we know how it worked in geopolitical situations and relations. Very difficult. It's theory. A way to answer to this complexity via, for instance, projects in Africa is creating the condition in order to enable the local stakeholders to create their own project, to create more trust locally. And we try to make sure that the locals work over time and are sustainable over time. That's what we ask the European Union. Don't come with a massive money for massive projects and then you leave, because you need to invest in the capacity building. This is essential. This is. Thanks for your question. I have a question regarding the Marshall Plan you talked about for Europe. A Marshall Plan towards companies. Yes, but at the beginning, it came from a federal state, and Europe is not a federal state. Can we not point out the difficulties or the specificity, rather, of the European Commission because European institutions are particular, specific. That's the difference. And should this institution not be changed and modified to promulgate more adapted policies? The next year there will be some European election. Are these elections going to bring something to this institution in order to be able to answer those challenges? I hope my question was clear. So the question is, if I understand well, are European institutions a break to sustainable development? Tomorrow in the next elections, the center will certainly be eaten up by extreme left and the extreme right. Like Mrs. Meloni said, let's stop, it's not affordable, let's stop sustainability. Some say we're going to break a bit. 58 degrees in Brazil. The forest is burning. There are floods. But we are told it is too costly. No, I think it's the lack of acceleration that costs too much. But in any case, we are the institutions. Break, I don't think. It really depends on the equilibrium after votation. We'll see in June next year how it looks like. I think it is rather reassuring because the regulations that are being implemented will be here for a couple of decades, so it will be difficult to avoid applying them. So it's not the institutions, it's the political will. That's what you say, right? Question? Thank you for your question. Nicolas Fourcroy, President of Eurocom. I am accompanying companies who have funding problems, especially in the sustainable energy, mobility, or tourism sector. I worked with the European Commission for several years as lobbyist. The Green Deal brought a lot of hope. But like any big problem, there are red signals, especially for the midterm companies who invest in the green field. There are huge sums that are sent to funds. However, the criteria of mobilizing these funds, especially in innovation, or there is no scalability of the project, and the selection criteria are de facto excluding these project from European mechanism. Without even the Commission being aware of it, because they delegate these selection to national actors, stakeholders. How do you think the next Commission that will be nominated next year will be able to take these points into consideration and avoid to mix and to apply the same criteria to good and bad projects when it comes to green finance?
Isn't as great yet. I just moved here 2 months ago. If you can quickly, that would be nice. I think it's about green funding available to smaller.
The question was about financing of SMEs, especially with greenfield project, innovative greenfield project, who are analyzed by the intermediary selected by the European Commission on the same level that non-green project, and where the green innovative part of the project are considered as a risk by finance and not as a positive consideration.
Absolutely. I think for SMEs in general, it has proven trickier to access finance, whether it's private finance or public finance, than it has for big corporations
and
or
even more
multinationals.
after COVID and the war.
Yeah. And particularly because a lot of the landscape has shifted. So when we talked a lot about biodiversity and risks and finance pre-COVID, that focus isn't there anymore that much, so it's also harder to access funding for some of these projects. It's even harder trying to understand the existing regulations and what you would have to do to actually qualify for them. It's even harder to make these improvements. So the bigger the companies are, the easier it seems to be for them to not necessarily understand, but kind of play the game that they are required to play to access. So what we're seeing a lot more is smaller companies trying to raise it through private finance, and different initiatives trying to get funding through different financial mechanisms, rather than trying to get the public finance, which it shouldn't be. Let's be fairly honest. That wasn't, I think, the intention at all. but it's unfortunately how it turned out, and I think that's the problem with the way these public funding rounds are structured, the way the decisions are made around where the finance goes, and also the hurdles you have to jump through to qualify. You're talking about risks, you're talking about impacts, quantifying that, measuring that, showing that, are hurdles that seem to have moved. So companies sometimes tell us it's like they constantly move the goalpost. So one year we have to prove that, we can do this now, and then the next year for the next funding, we actually have to do something in addition to that. And then we have to do something in addition to that. So it seems that the hurdles are moving quicker sometimes than a company has ability to adjust, and particularly smaller to medium enterprises. Seems like they're jumping through these hurdles and hurdles and hurdles without being able to get this. So I completely agree. I think there is some fundamental problems.
Many of these companies have no choice but to sell themselves to bigger ones to move forward. And considering the risk that are taken by creators, innovators, who don't necessarily have as an ambition to be bought back by a bigger company to make like a jump in their financial assets. I think it's contrary to what are the objectives of the European Union as they are displayed.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, one of the big claims of the Green Deal is to increase competition, to make growth in a responsible way and increase the competitiveness of Europe. At the moment, that links maybe to the hypocrisy Jan was mentioning earlier, that the ambition and the actual implementation of some of these plans don't align. And that's definitely something to keep working on and raising and working on. It might be a general problem in the way these processes are designed about the funding. It might be others, but unfortunately, I have to fully agree, and I don't have a perfect solution for this at the moment either, rather than continuously trying to raise the voices and make it very clear that this is what's happening and that this is not aligned with the overall strategic aim of these plans and the funding that should go along with that.
The problem is that sometimes you have millions of euros who are burned in the development of these companies based on the ambitions, the goals displayed at European level. And then entrepreneurs are reaching a wall after spending sometimes years in development just to be told, okay, your project is too risky, it's formidable, but it's too risky. But we can lend you money for 25 pounds. Hey.
Absolutely, and you're forgetting that there are also regional differences, so it would depend. It's a European strategy, but it's implemented differently in different countries, so what you have to do to access finance in France can be a little bit different than in Germany or in other countries. So you're often very much dependent on the region you are in, as well as the local implementation of these policies, because the way Europe works. So these big strategic plans and all these agreements are implemented by governments within their own countries, and they also sometimes have different ways of implementing that. So you're absolutely sometimes at the mercy of where you're based, what way this regulation is implemented. As I said, it's not necessarily the same across Europe. It very much depends on which country you operate, but generally we see similar tendencies across a range of countries, unfortunately. So it's not just a French problem or a Polish problem or something. It's, I think, the way these funding mechanisms work. And they don't really work that way at the moment to increase competition, even though that was the overall strategic aim, and they are not really designed to help smaller companies and entrepreneurs to access, which is a real shame. But as I said, that's unfortunately at the moment, that seems to be what's coming out from practice, is that they are not working the way they should.
There is no one singular Europe. No. There are many Europes. That's what you're saying. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Any other question? If not, I would have a question about the social aspects. We used to talk about green, about environment, but what about the social challenges? And you mentioned that comes together with the climate concern, etc.
Yes, you're right. And I mentioned that survey with 7 citizens out of 10 saying that they see the energy transition, the green transition, being a factor of more inequalities in Europe. So there is some fear, there's even in some categories anxiety. So we believe that the Green Deal will be green if you put much more human and social in it. I don't say that, it's what I hear from more and more CEOs of companies, the ones that are working in the Business Commission tackling inequalities. That's at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. CEOs working in CSI Europe, those who are working in an initiative called Business for Inclusive Growth. They see inequalities as a high systemic risk. There is the volume, but there is also the nature of this phenomenon. And maybe they wake up late, but they are starting to make it a key point. And some of them will go and discuss in March with President von der Leyen and other commissioners to see how to roll out the Green Deal as a social Green Deal. Now, it might sound abstract. We are developing a number of proposals, the companies, the national networks, working at CISA Europe, some ideas, only some ideas, maybe 3. One, we say, it is maybe time for companies and governments not only to adopt a climate science-based approach, but also a human science-based approach. How can we bring in the intelligence of human sciences? Is it neuroscience, sociology, anthropology, and so forth, into business so that we better understand the human factor, the human behavior? Because you can come with the best solution if there is a blockage, if there are a number of unconscious bias, and that you do not understand, well, there you are stuck. That's one proposal. The other one, I think I mentioned it, we would like to see a complete taxonomy to support the efforts on climate, on environment, and on social. If not, it's a signal to the investors that this is maybe not so relevant or important. So it's critical that we can unlock financial capitals to flow to companies to support them in their social efforts. And last but not least, I had the chance to work with Jacques Delors, a French politician who was president of the Commission, and he was the one that created, with many, many others, the social dialogue in Europe. It's part of the European governance. It's a body that can make regulations. So the first regulations on parental leave in Europe came from the social dialogue, where employers and trade unions negotiated a law. I am advocating for adding a sustainability dialogue where there is much more intelligence around the table from civil society to discuss the complexity of the issues, to help the Commission to better connect policies and initiatives, because it's like any big power, il y a des baronnies. And civil society has sometimes the skills to find that on the ground there are too much incoherent policies that are being led at the same time. So a sustainability dialogue also to create what I call social friendship, even between organizations who do not share the same ideology. They don't have to go on holidays together, but you cannot refuse anymore to collaborate, even if there is a difference in opinions. And I have many examples of that, but that would be too long.
Can I just add something? Sure. Because I agree. On the one hand, the problem at the moment, the EU taxonomy definition of what's sustainable business activity only covers environmental issues, but it's quite inconsistent in other regulation. When we talk about CSRD, we have 4 environmental accounting standards, we have 4 social accounting standards. So what's actually missing at the moment is consistency across these different regulatory frameworks, and particularly because some of these mechanisms aren't designed to be very effective for human rights. When we talk about reporting, we talk about materiality. Should materiality be the key thing when it comes to modern slavery? No, because materiality means you need a certain amount of people to be affected. We could easily argue that salience would be the key, even if you have small numbers, but if you have modern slavery in your supply chain, that is unacceptable. It shouldn't be based on materiality, and it's the same. The accounting often struggles with going beyond the same organization, so extending towards the supply chain is where the struggle is, but this is where most of the human rights problems occur, and they are not within the European organizations and their headquarters in Europe, they're across their whole supply chain. And getting this consistency across all these regulatory framework to really engage and kind of attack these kind of systematic or systemic problems in a lot of industries across supply chains, across different regulatory frameworks, and understanding that some of these are just unacceptable. I think that's one of the main problems. It's not necessarily enough to just have some accounting standards that kind of go along, but they are not included in some of the other key regulatory frameworks. So I think that's kind of one thing.
Thank you, Madlen. So let's not forget the social challenges. This session comes to an end. Thank you very much. You have demonstrated with many examples that a green, competitive, but also a fair Europe is on the way, but requiring a strong cooperation between institutions, financial parties, and also private parties. Thank you to the audience for your attention. I would like also to thank our speakers, Madlen, Yann, and Vianney, to be with us today. Thank you very much, and you will find this session recorded on the World Forum website. So I wish you a very good World Forum for the next hours. Thank you.